as you know, our class is called Revelation, End of the World, or Cause for Hope. Today's class, as I was just saying, is on Hebrew apocalyptic literature. Hebrew apocalyptic literature. What is it? And before we answer that question, we first consider its origins. Hebrew apocalyptic literature is a genre of writing that developed during the exilic and post-exilic periods of Jewish history. That would be during around 750 BCE and up through around the 150s BCE. Apocalyptic literature developed out of a different, although connected genre of writing, the prophetic writings. So as I talk about the prophetic writings as juxtaposed to the apocalyptic writings, just know that the apocalyptic writings are a subgenre of the prophetic writings. So prophetic writings are not necessarily apocalyptic, but apocalyptic writings are in the prophetic genre as well. Prophetic writings were written roughly between the years 750 BCE and 350 BCE. These years span the conquest of Judah and Israel by the Assyrians, which happened through the year 750 to 700 BCE, which was followed by the Babylonian conquest of the Assyrians and further subjugation of the Hebrews by the Persian Empire after that. And so you see this time frame I've listed out here between the years 750 and 300s, and then it would continue on, but that marks the end. 332 marks the end of this period of writing. What would come next would be the Greek and then the Roman empires continuing in the occupation. But the literature we're talking about was written up and through the Persian Empire, the Persian conquest, which ended around 332, and that would be the prophetic writings. That's an important thing to note, because all of this to say, these writings were written during centuries of violence, calamity, and uncertainty. And they were meant to address those needs in the people, the uncertainty specifically, to help them cope. And of these writings, biblical scholars Louis Stolman and Hoyan Chul Palkim write, the prophetic corpus is ultimately survival literature for exiles of old and exiles today. Survival literature, yes. And that's why it has that desperate tone, and that's why that's why writing around the time of war and during war and occupations are always grisly and deal with the very ugliest aspects of human suffering. And that's this literature. It's important to keep that in mind. It's important to remember that the Hebrew prophetic writings were written in the context of great loss, pain, and anxiety. And of this, Stolman and Kim write, written prophecy is a mediation on the horror of war and its devastating repercussions. Not unlike contemporary art, it dares to broach the abyss with candor and fractured beauty. It courageously comes face to face with a world in disarray and fraught with moral ambiguity. And it refuses to retreat into denial. Otherwise, its social and symbolic constructions would scarcely resonate with its disenfranchised communities, eking out life on the edge of time and space. And that last line grips me, eking out life on the edge of time and space. These were writings written for people who've experienced life in that way. And also, I should say, before we move much further, that much confusion has been generated around this word of prophecy in general. Today, a prophet is thought of as one who makes predictions, hopefully accurately, about the future. If somebody on an airplane tells you they're a prophet, do you want to move closer to them or do you inch further away? Right? It's seen now, those who are self-proclaimed prophets today are often thought of as charlatans because they so often get it wrong. But this is also to reduce the role of a prophet to fortune teller, and also to miss the nature and meaning of the role. Because the prophetic role in the biblical world was quite different. So when you read about prophets in the Bible, of Isaiah, of Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Moses, all of them, we're not reading about predictors of the future. They spoke of future possibilities in order to make sense of the present. So they might look into the near horizon and say, Israel will be laid to waste and will be no more. Now, it was attacked and much of it was destroyed, but it wasn't no more. But they set the most dire possibility up in front of the people in order to warn them of the pending calamities that may come if they don't change their ways, which is the ultimate goal of a prophetic writing, to get the people to see the urgency of the moment and to change their ways. The Hebrew word for prophet is navi, which means to proclaim, mention, call, or summon. And so this word that you read as prophet in your Bible, that's what it means. So keep that in mind as we move forward using this word in our own parlance, but also when you go back to read those Hebrew scriptures in the old, what we refer to as the Old Testament, remember that when the word prophet is used, that's what it means. And it's thought that the prophet was one who would proclaim specifically the viewpoint and intentions of God. They had a unique relationship and a unique perspective on God's intentions and viewpoint. They were social critics. They would name what was broken in society in bombastic language. They were political reformers calling for change from the top down. And they castigated the royal and priestly classes alike, naming corruption in high places, which is why prophets so often found themselves on the run or out of the good favor of those who were in control. But they were also poets. Some of the Psalms are prophetic works, and there is poetry interspersed throughout the other writings, like such as in Isaiah, Jeremiah, and we miss that because it's translated into English, and we miss the cadence and the word plays. Not to mention poetry was written for different tastes back then, and so we miss a lot of that. But keep in mind, a lot of it is poetry. They are also, though, religious philosophers, because interspersed throughout this discussion about the world and all that's wrong in it and where God fits and where the people fit, questions of evil and God's providence, God's being in control, were bound to come up. And so they would try to write as to how a God who was just and loving and on their side could allow these calamities to happen. For centuries, they would struggle with this question. They would write of possible futures for the people. Sometimes these came in form of dire predictions, but one of the tendencies of the prophets, if not their hallmark, and this is what we most, I think, appreciate about them today, was their ability to imagine a future on the other side of their current circumstance, the current calamity, whether that be the exile, the Babylonians sending them, dispersing them all through the Babylonian Empire, or the conquest of the Persian Empire, whatever they were facing. The prophet would see a bright future full of everything good, just past all of the ugliness. And it's perhaps for this reason that they are sometimes thought of as fortune or future tellers. But the possible futures they saw were by no means certain. So today, when we think of a prophecy, we read it, and if it doesn't come to pass precisely as we think they meant it to come to pass, we say that was a failed prophecy. But the intent of the Hebrew prophets wasn't so much to tell the future in certain terms, but to highlight the consequences of the way the people were living at that time, from the royals and the rulers to the lowest citizens. They would write of the possible futures, and the future that would dominate would be a future for a new heaven and a new earth. Now, the canonical Hebrew prophetic writings, those that we Christians in the 21st century consider to be a part of these prophetic writings that we're talking about, are these three larger works: Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. And they are tomes. In fact, Isaiah is thought to be written by three different authors spread out over the course of time. And if you're scandalized by that it was a common practice in that day for writers, even biblical writers, to write in the name or tradition of a prophet of old. So Isaiah is a composition of various writings in that tradition. And then the 12 are called the 12 because they traditionally were included on one scroll once they had been written and distributed throughout the land. And these include all of those minor prophets, we call them minor prophets, that you've heard of: Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah. I won't list them all here. Then Christians have also included Lamentations as a prophetic work and the book of Daniel under the heading of prophetic works. But in Hebrew circles and Jewish scholarships, these have historically been held under the subheading of just writings. But still, the themes contained therein are similar to the ones we've been talking about. And what did the prophets write about? They wrote of gut-wrenching devastation of war, of their families butchered and their homes destroyed. They wrote of the poor and wicked leadership that made the conquest more likely. In other words, they provided biting social commentary addressed to their nation's leaders and citizens generally. In these writings, they castigate those in power who have become godless and corrupt. They wrote of the devastating consequences of failing to live into God's vision for the people. But despite it all, they often wrote of a bright future, one in which the people would turn from their evil ways. The land would be restored and society would flourish in new and unprecedented ways. That picture to your right of that, it was on a wall of a structure in the area we're talking about, and what was then Assyria. And here you have Assyrians leading people from around the place of Jordan. And that, again, these would probably be Hebrew people being led into captivity and bondage. And this is, a stylist that was erected thousands of years ago. Here's an example of a prophetic writing from Micah chapter 7, verses 1 through 7. This would have been written right around the time of the Assyrian conquest, between the year 737 and 696 BCE. And the prophet wrote, "Woe is me, for I have become like one who, after the summer fruit has been gathered, after the vintage has been gleaned, finds no cluster to eat. There is no first ripe fig for which I hunger. The faithful have disappeared from the land, and there is no one left who is upright. They all lie in wait for blood, and they hunt each other with their nets. Their hands are skilled to do evil. The official and the judge ask for a bribe, and the powerful dictate what they desire. Thus they pervert justice. The best of them is like a briar, and the most upright of them a thorn hedge. The day of their sentinels of their punishment has come. Now their confusion is at hand. Put no trust in a friend. Have no confidence in a loved one. Guard the doors of your mouth from her who lies in your embrace. For the son treats the father with contempt. The daughter rises up against her mother. The daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. For your enemies are members of your own household. But as for me, I will look to the Lord. I will wait for the God of my salvation. My God will hear me." This is, I would call it vintage prophetic writing, one that leans far more into the woe is me and the what's wrong with the world than what is right with the world. But they make judgments of the moral landscape, specifically at the leaders, and then they bring it down to even inside the household. Things are corrupt at every level. Everything is cattywampus, where even mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, people in your own household you can't trust. But I left that last line there because lines like these are, I think they're what we appreciate most about the prophetic literature today. And I think that they encapsulate the point of their writing, which was to, despite all that I just read before, give the people confidence that God is faithful and they can hold out for something good to break through. And that last line being, "But as for me, I will look to the Lord. I will wait for the God of my salvation. My God will hear me." So through their lives, right, Stolman and Kim, though their lives have been turned upside down, the text is still adamant that Yahweh reigns and will one day deliver the exiles from their oppressor. The interpretive community punctuates the scroll with the prospect of better times. End quote. Their insistence on a better future for the people stemmed from their assumptions about God's love and justice. A just God cannot, should not allow evil to overrun the world. From the Hebrew perspective in exile, this is what has momentarily happened. But a just and faithful God will not allow things to continue this way. Or to put it in the words of another prophet, Zephaniah, "At that time, I will bring you home. At that time when I gather you, for I will make you renowned and praised, when I restore your fortunes before your eyes, says the Lord." Well, we're about to turn into an important distinction here about what is apocalyptic literature. Remember, I said that apocalyptic literature is prophetic, but not all prophetic writing is apocalyptic. What makes it apocalyptic? Well, During the occupation and influence of the Persian Empire, a new genre of literature was developing out of the prophetic writings, apocalyptic literature. And I'll here remind you that apocalypse does not mean the end of the world, or really the end of anything. Rather, it means something uncovered or revealed. With that in mind, I'd like to quote extensively from James M. Eford's book, Left Behind, or Left Behind, what the Bible really says about the end times. And I'm quoting this at length because I think it really gives a good overview of the genre of apocalyptic writing. He writes, the apocalyptic writing movement, which began in post-exilic Judaism in 300 to 200 BC, so after, remember, prophetic writing started in around 750, this around 300, so it's a development out of, and it was first a thought pattern that developed a literary style to serve as a vehicle for speaking to persecuted people. At base, the apocalyptic ideology held that a cosmic battle between the forces of good and the forces of evil was taking place in the world. Since the earth is part of the cosmic order, the battle also rages within human history, and people are called up to ally themselves with one side or the other. In apocalyptic literature, there is little room for gray areas. The battle, it was believed, would be long and hard. There were times when good had the upper hand. There were times when the two sides were nearly even, but there were also times when evil had the upper hand, and in such situations, those on the good side suffered and were persecuted. Even though it was thought that there would be a final end to all this conflict and that good would ultimately triumph over evil, the Hebrew concept of history kept the people from thinking of only one great conflict at the end. The idea of Jewish apocalyptic writing centered on ages, specifically a present age that had come under the domination of the forces of evil and could only be redeemed by the intervention of God. God alone could take away the persecution and restore the people to a quote unquote normal life. This led to the idea of a two-age system in Jewish thought, a present age under the dominion of the forces of evil, and soon to come new age in which persecution would be removed. The main point to remember is that history continues to move along, and in the course of events, a new period of evil may be born, thus repeating the cycle again. Since the Jewish community in Palestine had returned from exile in Babylon in 538, their lot had been anything but good. They were politically powerless, economically poor, and militarily vulnerable to any who decided to come into their area and loot or pillage. It is no wonder that apocalyptic thinking became part of the people's mindset during this stage of their existence. To facilitate the dissemination of these ideas, a literary style was created, characterized by the use of strange symbols and images. This next part I think is important to note, so I'm going to pause and just as an aside say, pay attention to this next part. For people who were a part of that culture and time, these symbols and images were readily recognizable, much in the same way as people today recognize the meaning of political cartoons. No one has to explain the grotesque figures and images to us. Most people know their intent because they employ a literary device common to our culture and time. In apocalyptic symbolism, beasts stood for nations. Heads on beasts represented rulers. Numbers had specific but symbolic meaning, so did colors. In any apocalyptic, I have highlighted this next part. In any apocalyptic work, as with any biblical book, the interpreters must know something about the historical setting in which the book was written so as to interpret the book as the inspired author intended. Why that is so important to emphasize and why we've gone to so much efforts to do the groundwork before we get into the actual text of Revelation, which will happen not next week, but the week after, is this very thing. So much of Revelation in the symbology, even the numbers, the beasts, all of the stuff that gives rise to terror and confusion would have been immediately accessible in the time of its writing. People would know who was meant by these beasts, who was symbolized, and what the author meant by the judgments that were coming down on, in that case, the Roman Empire as a result. Judgments that we will get to and talk about them and what they signify. But the important point is much of the interpretation of Revelation that you have heard, that I have heard in my lifetime, was interpreted removed from its context with little to no understanding of the symbols or their meanings. But again, I'm sneaking a little peek into where we're going with all of this. That will be in the coming weeks. Here are the key features of apocalyptic literature. This will be how you know that's what you're reading when you read it. While prophetic literature does not insist on moral categories, the lines between them are less, well, it does, sorry, let me reread that. Prophetic literature does insist on more moral categories. The lines between them are less clear. For example, some prophets will laud a king and others will castigate that king. For example, one person will say that David was a man after God's own heart, and then another prophet will say David was a real jerk. So you get both. In apocalyptic literature, however, there is little moral ambiguity. The world is divided in stark lines between the righteous and the unrighteous, the wicked and the upright, the light and the dark. And here I should say something of Persian theology, because this prophetic literature began in the context of the Persian occupation. And the Persians, in their belief system, in their cosmic belief system, also believed in a world divided between stark lines of the righteous, the unrighteous, the wicked and the upright, the light and the dark. Concept of Satan as an actual figure that would feature in these stories developed around this time. Before the 300s, 400s, there was no penultimate evil adversary. There was a Satan mentioned in some books as an adversary working against God's purposes, but there wasn't until around this time of the writing of, say, the book of Daniel, a clear idea of a cosmic Satan and a celestial battle that was happening. And admittedly, that theology came from the Persian influence in the area. It influenced Judaism and Greek thought permanently. And we still think through this lens today. But it started around this time. While the prophetic going on, features of apocalyptic literature. While prophetic literature is aware of the tension between good and evil in the world, apocalyptic literature describes the conflict on a cosmic scale, the very forces of God and Satan arrayed in heavenly battle. Here's where you begin to get archangels with specific names. Here is a top-down battle that influences every sphere of the divine and creation. And while prophetic literature has a more linear understanding of history, moving from past to present and then a possible future, apocalyptic literature thinks of history in terms of cycles or ages. And I should pause to say that this way of thinking began to develop before apocalyptic writing, thinking of the world in terms of ages and cycles. I just make mention of that. It didn't develop in apocalyptic literature, but apocalyptic literature will assume this vantage point. And the prophet assumes that they're living in a wicked age, an age totally enthralled to the forces of Satan and evil. Apocalyptic literature uses symbolism and metaphor to unveil deep truths. This is not a distinction from prophetic literature, but it's just because prophetic literature will sometimes have symbolism and metaphor to unveil deep truths, but apocalyptic literature is steeped in it. I mean, we almost think of it as exclusively that, symbols and metaphor. Moving on, while prophetic literature leans into a hopeful future, apocalyptic literature describes not only the nature of this future, a new heavens and a new earth, in other words, but also the seismic process by which God will bring about the conclusion of the old/evil age and the advent of the new restored age. So it describes not only the two ages, but the tension point where the old is brought down and defeated and the new is brought up and what can be restored is restored. While prophetic literature may foresee a positive future for the people, apocalyptic literature all but guarantees a positive future. Its function, as I keep harping on, is to instill hope in the hearts of a persecuted people during terrible times. While prophetic literature does not describe in detail how God will bring about the sweeping changes necessary for a new heavens and a new earth, apocalyptic literature often includes a messianic figure empowered by God to bring about the necessary transformations in our world and also in the heavens. And as the quintessential Hebrew apocalyptic text, we have Daniel, specifically Daniel chapters 7 through 12. That section is an apocalyptic work. In fact, biblical scholars believe it may have defined the genre itself. It came earlier than much of the apocalyptic works that would not make it into our official biblical canon, but would have been in circulation around this time. But the prophet of Daniel seems to have built upon influences that were being revealed in what we call pseudo-apocalyptic writings, which can be found in portions of Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Joel. But this one is thought of as like not only borrowing on those influences, but being a thoroughly apocalyptic writing. And I'll just read to you a little bit of it for flavor so you can get the feel. This is from Daniel chapter 8, verses 18 through 27. And again, this is apocalyptic literature. As he was speaking to me, I fell into a trance, face to the ground. Then he touched me and set me on my feet. He said, listen, and I will tell you what will take place later in the period of wrath, for it refers to the appointed time of the end. As for the ram that you saw with the two horns, these are the kings of Media and Persia. The male goat is the king of Greece, and the great horn between its eyes is the first king. As for the horn that was broken, in place of which 4 others arose, 4 kingdoms shall arise from his nation, but not with his power. At the end of their rule, when the transgressions have reached their full measure, a king of bold countenance shall arise, skilled in intrigue. He shall grow strong in power, shall cause fearful destruction, and shall succeed in what he does. He shall destroy the powerful and the people of the holy ones. By his cunning, he shall make deceit prosper under his hand, and in his own mind he shall be great. Without warning, he shall destroy many, and shall even rise up against the prince of princes. But he shall be broken, and not by human hands. The vision of the evenings and the mornings that has been told is true. As for you, seal up the vision, for it refers to many days from now. So I, Daniel, was overcome and lay sick for some days. Then I arose and went about the king's business, but I was dismayed by the vision and did not understand it. So notice the short phrase at the end of verse 25. But he being this tyrannical ruler that actually should remind us of another tyrannical ruler mentioned in the book of Revelation, the eighth Antichrist, as it's called. This is a big penultimate ruler, the prince of princes, it's called, but he shall be broken and not by human hands. And the not human hands mentioned here is a passing reference to a messianic figure that the Jewish apocalyptic writings will continue to include. There is one sent from the divine who will overthrow the powers of evil on earth. And this one, or the Son of Man, as he will be referred to in Daniel chapter 7, will be a human ruler empowered by God to throw off the powers of evil that have long held the people in their grips. So that's what's in the soil in the centuries building up to the time of Jesus. And that was a very cursory overview. Very. In fact, I kept getting lost in the weeds and having to focus as I kept going down tangents and rabbit trails in preparation for this. So there's a lot. I know I'm giving you information through a fire hose, but there's a lot more I could have included. But I just wanted to paint a picture of the development of this genre and just make you aware that these writings would have been around in the centuries leading up to the time of Jesus. And those rebels that I will sometimes mention in my sermons or sometimes reference when we're talking about the biblical history, the Maccabees revolt, for instance, or those zealots that are mentioned in the Gospels that have been subjugated by the Roman Empire, rebellions put down. They were inspired oftentimes from these writings, or they were inspired by these writings, or these writings came out of those movements, these rebellions. And so up until the time of Jesus, there had been many messianic figures who stood and tried to throw out the oppressors in one way, form or another, sometimes with varying degrees of success. But they would always come to an ill fate, and they would not bring about the realm of God, the kingdom, the new heavens and the new earth as it had been believed they would. And then Jesus comes along, and he is the most recent in the long line of these. He would have been well aware of some of the writings we're familiar with from the books of Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Joel, and Zechariah. I have included the portions here that have what we call proto-apocalyptic works, which means you can see in the writing some of what will become later clearly apocalyptic. Then we have Daniel, which is the only thoroughly apocalyptic book in our Hebrew Bible canon. But then we have all of these non-canonical books that were written between the 3rd and 1st centuries BCE up until the time of Jesus. Apocalypticism and Jesus. Jesus, as I've been saying, was well familiar with these works. And we know this because his theology was shot through with the thoughts of the apocalyptic prophets. He quoted them and even taught with apocalyptic language himself. Read through Matthew 24. That is pure stock apocalyptic language. He believed that he was living during an evil age, and that would soon come to an end. He saw himself as the arbiter of this change. He referred to himself as the Son of Man, a reference to Daniel's apocalypse. That is almost the way he is exclusively referred to in the Gospel of Mark, for instance. But he seems to have added a twist, which would influence the beliefs of his contemporaries, as well as spark a new movement within Judaism. Luke 17, 20 through 21 describe this twist to which I'm referring. Here it is quoted. Once Jesus was asked by the Pharisees when the kingdom of God was coming. And by now, I hope you can substitute in your mind new age there, because that's what's being talked about. Think of everything we've just talked about up to this point. The Pharisees are wanting to know, when will the new age come in full, and the evil empires of the day will be subjugated? And Jesus answered, the kingdom of God is not coming with things that can be observed, nor will they say, look, here it is, or there it is. For in fact, the kingdom of God is among you. Some translations put that in your midst. So here, the apocalypse, if it can be described as a singular event, is happening around Jesus in real time. That's how he describes it. Instead of seeing human history divided into 2 ages, the old and new, or the evil/righteous, the light age and the dark age, he sees the lines between these ages blurred. He sees himself as one who brings the realm of God, or this new age, with him to share with his disciples and anyone else who would put their faith in his way of being. However, the work is not yet complete. Jesus would even say, some of you here today will not die before you taste the coming of the realm. And yet, when Jesus left and ascended, much of the book of Acts is written to describe what the church did to adapt and to cope with this realization that they still had some time to live on the earth. They had tasted some of the fruits of the new age, the new realm, and were living into that, and as they lived into Christian community and knew a new way of being. But they were still in those twilight years of the old age and the golden dawn of the new. The cosmic battle continued to rage, but the end result would be as reliable as God's nature, trustworthy and just. God will see all of creation through to the life it was made for. Those were the beliefs that arose in the early Christian community, seeing the apocalypse as something that was happening, the unveiling, not the end of the world, but that they were in a pivotal moment between an old way and a new way. And that's all we'll cover for tonight. The next class will be the 25th. That's in a week from today, same time, same place, here in the library at Northwood, or virtually through Zoom. And we'll be talking about the origins of Revelation. So we brought it up to the time of Jesus. We'll talk about Jesus and we'll talk more about his worldview and his apocalyptic lens that he held. And then we will talk of the context in which the book of Revelation was written, how the people were living that first received it. Here is, again, the reading list. I will pull up you all. Oh, here's Sue. Hope she hasn't been waiting long. She's joining us in late. Hi, Sue. Can you hear us?
Yes.
Sorry we missed you.
I know. We getting an echo. We've been house hunting.
Oh, okay. Well, that's
we took longer than we thought.
Well, we just concluded. So I was just talking about what's coming next. Apologies.
That's my fault.
No, it's okay. And what I was going to say, if I could get this screen to cooperate, is for this week's class, the things I will reference for your own edification. The books I most used were this one, You Are My People, by Louis Stolman and Hyun Chul Paul Kim. Hope I'm saying that correctly. And it's an introduction to prophetic literature. And this really focuses on Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, and then the other 12 minor prophets. And as was the case last week, I relied heavily on lectures from the teaching company's course called The Apocalypse, Controversies and Meaning in Western History, specifically the second and third lessons. You can get that at your local library. I'll finish with a disclaimer and leave it open for questions. My disclaimer is I'll try to answer your questions, Nancy, as best as I can, but I'm still a journeyman scholar, not the real deal. So.
No, well, I've moved on to a different question.
Sure.
I mean, my original question was, what does this literature have to tell us in today's crisis in Israel and Gaza?
Oh.
So it doesn't apply in any way.
Well, it does in that readers of these books in that specific geographic location, 2,500 years later, would be aware of forces of violence and uncertainty in tumultuous times that would surely resonate with the original audience. And they could find corollaries between their own circumstance, like in the evil empires of old. How are their adversaries similar or dissimilar to the Assyrians and the Babylonians? Or how are we similar to those? And what does that teach us about us? Because it can cut both ways depending on what direction you approach the text. Me personally, I approach it as a rather privileged person in the midst of a very, if not the most profitable, the most rich, wealthy, affluent culture. And so I come at it wondering, in what ways do my ways of living negatively impact the world, making those who could read this book seeing themselves as the oppressed? What ways I can amend of my own? So I said, when you asked that question earlier, yes and no. And I wasn't being wishy-washy. I was saying no in the sense that it was about the Assyrian Empire, but yes in the sense that it still teaches us about humanity today.
Okay. So if you were to summarize tonight's lesson, how would you, I was trying to take notes, but I can't write fast enough. So I'm not sure. I got all the points. So apocalyptic writings are a subset of prophetic writings, right?
Correct.
Yeah. And they were written like 750 to 350.
The prophetic writings were, and then the apocalyptic writings started around 3.
Oh yeah, 350 to like 2 something.
But a lot of them, they started to be like there's portions of Ezekiel that are what they call pseudo apocalyptic, meaning you see there's not full on like an apocalyptic work, but it has some of those themes. And those are like
Daniel, the only truly apocalyptic. Isn't that what you said, Daniel?
The only truly thoroughly like what's thought of as fit right in the genre, without any is Daniel is the only one that's like, especially the 7th through 12th chapters written, seems to be written very consciously in that genre.
Okay.
Said the scholars I read.
Okay. And it's a hopeful kind of, it's a writing of hope. Is that right?
They are meant to be, yes. So with all of the imagery of violence, because the apocalyptic writers are trying to give expression to the violence and evil around them. And so they'll describe beasts and over the top battles that include more people than we know were alive. Like just to scale, because they're trying to convey this sense of a cosmic struggle that we are stuck in the middle of. And the message is, we've had centuries of this, but we can see the old age crumbling. We can see the cracks in the empires of old. That's why you get this, and Daniel get an image of a statue that is made of 4 composite materials, and each one representing a different nation that had occupied the land of Israel, starting with the Assyrians, the order that we know: Assyrians, Babylon, Persia, and the Greeks. The Greeks are the foot, and the feet are made of clay, like stone, and they crumble because its foundation, which is the last part of this, which is in the latter stages of these empires. Think of the chronology here. We're talking, the writer is quickly moving through in this visual illustration, hundreds of years of history and occupation, and then is saying that the foundations of this empire are crumbling. And for the reasons that empires crumble. They do not have in mind the things of God. They subjugate and oppress people for their own benefit and profit. And in the mind of the apocalyptic writer, if there is a good and just God that has us and holds us, then there will be a satisfactory conclusion. The question is, how do you get from this mess to that point? And the apocalyptic writers will try to describe in poetic terms, I guess, the tone more than the literal details of the transition. The fire, the flames, the earthquakes, it's that kind of, the evil has that kind of grip on the creative order that it will take quite a commotion to disentangle it from the human race. That's why they write like that.
I think if you go back, you look at Noah, God got a little mad, got rid of everybody but 8 people.
Well,
and the same with Israel. Israel broke all the laws, and so they got conquered, but then God brought them back. So we're going to go through some bad, but we're going to get to the good.
That, what I was going to say is not all theologies reflected in the Bible are coherent and agree with one another. Some of the Hebrews and Hebrew prophets believed that all of the violence around them was judgment for their evil, and they would write of it in those terms. And others saw the nations outside as the primary cause, as an arbitrary evil that was putting them under. In the case of, that's a whole can of worms too, if we're going to talk Noah and the
Yeah.
annihilation of
Well, I just see
puppies.
A similarity when I think about God through the human age that we know he connected with man. He gets upset, and he over the years have done certain things when, well, it's just like when they made the calf, he wasn't happy about the calf, and he took care of some of that too. And so God does react, and to me now this is another time he's going to say, I've had enough, and I'm going to react. I'm going to give these people one more time, and they'll either do it or they won't. And then, we have the millennium, and then we have heaven.
Yeah.
We are going to be talking about these things. You're touching on things that I know are coming up, and so I'm fighting the temptation to dive in and keep us here another 20 minutes. But the last thing that caught me, the last thing you said does describe many of the prophet's intentions. They're putting all of the people on notice, and they're saying, you had better change now. It's already too late, but maybe not. And I kind of think God's going to see us through, like all in one, like in like one word full, like just all that, But one of the primary motives for writing was to get the people to wake up and to change. Well, not every lesson will be this text heavy. There was a lot of writing and text. You'll go back if you watch the video, Sue, you'll see a lot of it was text and reading from older prophets and other source materials that I consulted. Um, are there any other?
Need
Go
to
ahead.
go back and watch the recording, or is there something that we should read for next week, or should we just go back and go over the recording?
Well, if you feel like I moved too fast and there was something you missed as you were taking notes, I'd go back and watch the recording. I keep holding this up. Sorry, I keep holding this up, aware that I am the one who has it from the library. So it may not be. I got this from this. I believe I was at the college library, so it wasn't even at the central. But I don't know if there's more of these in circulation. This right here is going to do a better job of the whole scope of what I'm going to try to do than I do. This is Craig Coaster was in my suggested readings in my seminary class. He teaches at Luther Seminary, and he's very good in this topic. And so as I watched this, I kept thinking to myself, I should just sit him down. We should just go through this and watch it. But I felt like I would have been derelict in my duties. And I think it's good for me to struggle and wrestle and try to give my own words to what I think I'm learning, benefit me as a pastor and a person. The other thing, but this is a whole book, is what I referenced at the beginning too. You are my people. This is about the prophetic literature. But if you were wanting something that would it would tell you in 100 pages where I'm coming from and how I interpret Revelation. This book called Left Behind, ? What the Bible really says about the end times. It's 100 pages. It's by James Efford. And it is a quick read. You can get it done in an hour and a half to 2 hours. And it's written that way on purpose to be very accessible to people who don't have the time to read through all of these sort of things. And this is another one that I would, but this doesn't cover much of what we went through today. There's only about a page and a half about what we went through today, which should give you an idea of how brief it's trying to be.
Okay. Okay, got it.
Are there any other questions? I will say, as of last look, and I don't know what this means, but as of last time I checked, I'm opening my YouTube page right now, looking at my videos, 88 views. The last class has been, what I posted 6 days ago, has been viewed 88 times. So compared to like 9 views from this past week's sermon, you know what I mean? So I don't know what that means, but I'll keep my eye on that. It could be that we have several other people here with us, watching after the fact that we don't know.
We don't know if those are Northwood people or just people who are.
We don't know who they are. And I know I didn't send out the link 88 times. I sent it to our mailing list, so there are people that have found it somehow. And there are other people I know too are interested in this study that haven't been able to attend as of yet, that texted me before. Larry called me to let me know again that he would be probably watching it later. Well, it's 8 o'clock. Thank you for your attention. Thanks for jumping in late, Sue. It's good to see you either way. I imagine I'll see you tomorrow morning. And until then, God bless and keep you.
Okay.
We'll see you all between now and Sunday at some point.